Tom Gray here. Made me a new chop saw fixture for my Porter Cable 7724. This is a dramatic upgrade from one I made in an earlier video. I'll link it in the description. This one's a lot more rigid, a lot more stable, has a better vise, and keeps the features of the older one, which was a nice positive down stop and a nice positive up stop. Cut straight, very little effort. Here's a view of the other side. You can see the little up stop there, the down stop there. This was a good little project. Took me a couple of days. Show you how I did it. This is my homemade, made out of junk, old office furniture pieces, chop saw. But there's been some lessons learned. So I'm gonna rebuild this thing. It's got a few problems. It's worked good, I've used it a lot, but it's got a few problems. One, I designed it so you could cut angled miters, and I think I've used that feature twice. So I'm gonna eliminate that. I'm just not using it. Second thing is, the vise is too high and a little bit too far back. And it's a little bit weak. So I'm gonna fix that. And then the base is kind of tinny. Since it's such thin sheet metal, it works, it's just loud. And then lastly, it's a bit big. It's a little bit much to haul around from place to place when I need it. So I'm gonna try to make it smaller, stiffer, better vise, get rid of the miter feature, but keep some of the good stuff. For instance, the saw holds itself vertically when you're changing blades or setting up your work. It has a nice stop to it, so you can go too far. And overall, it's pretty smooth. To keep the self parking feature, whatever you want to call it, where it holds itself up so you can change blades, the motor, the mass of the motor has to be in front of the pivot. So that's a good thing about this design. So this goes over center, saw won't fall down while you're changing the blade. Another design oversight is I eliminated the front grab handle. Admitted I didn't have one when I bought this thing. Didn't come with one, but I bought a replacement. So I want to integrate the front handle so I can simply take it off of the chop saw fixture and use it like a regular handheld bandsaw. So I'm going to redo this bracket so it'll accommodate this. Another shortcoming of my junk office furniture design approach that I used was this old keyboard pivot wore out. The pivot, I used a 1/4" 20 screw as the pivot axle, and it wore this 14 gauge sheet metal out. And now I'm getting a lot of slop in the cuts, as you can see. So I'm going to replace that pivot with a proper axle bolt with proper bushings on it, all which fit much nicer and is a lot stronger. I clipped this scale onto the blade. Ideally, the pivot is right in line with the center of the blade. So when the saw comes down, the blade goes just past the center point of the pivot and you've cut whatever it is. So the last one, the pivot was 4 inches in front of the center of the front wheel. So I transferred the center of the front wheel to that mark right there. There's 4 inches. The blade's 1/2 inch wide. Got a 1/2 inch bolt. So I'm gonna put the pivot right there. 1/4 inch above this point is gonna be the center of the pivot bolt. All right, so here's the setup. I'm gonna use this piece of 2x2 square tubing as the spine. I'm going to use a little shark fin vise that I made in a previous video. I'll link to it in the description. And I cut this funky little piece of scrap for an ear to hold the pivot bolt. And that's going to go somewhere along about there. And this piece of cereal box shredded wheat, actually shredded wheats, is going to be the saw side of the pivot, the member that holds the saw up on the pivot. So I'm going to cut that out a 1/4 inch plate. I'm going to have to go scrounge around to see what I can come up with. So I stuck the bracket axle mount on a piece of 1/4 inch plate, which will serve as its base, and this can now slide around on the spine. Then I moved the saw over, clamped it over a couple inches so I could project the center line, the center line of the axle out. And it looks like I need to start bending this plate right about here, straight down, so that when I move it over, it'll pick up the axle. The angle I want to bend is the same as the angle between this surface and the blade. So it's going to take an angle gauge, align it. That looks about righteous, and that's our angle to copy. To make sure I'm bending this perpendicular to the center line of these holes, I'm just going to take a square, align it with the hole center lines, and mark it like that, and bend along that line. Reinstalled the bracket on the saw, and that looks righteous. She's square to the blade is square to the table, to the weld table, and this is square to the weld table. So this and the blade are parallel. Now I slid the saw back over to the edge of the vise, so the blade is right there, nice and close to the vise. And now I'm going to position the pivot hole. I removed the axle bolt. I'm going to position the pivot hole so that it's on, so I can mark a hole onto the saw support member. And here's a temporary setup. So I reattached the bracket. I just attached the lower member to the upper member with a 3/8 bolt. And now I'm just going to tack these together just to give her a test run and make sure everything works. Okay, that just about fits in there. So that's a press fit, I'm going to call it. That's good. Now I have to open the hole in the saw support member to fit over our new pivot bushing. You can see the nice machine finish. Left a few saw marks on it, but for the way less than very low RPM that this will be turning, that's going to hurt anything. So open that hole up. Got the saw table clamped to this piece of scrap that's held in the vise, and it's holding the blade square to the table, parallel to the table, and parallel to the spine. Now I'm going to simulate the pivot. I don't want to put the bushings in there because I don't want to weld on it with bronze bushings in there, so I'm going to use a flathead bolt that will center it on the bracket, and I'm going to simulate the flange of the bushing just with a washer and a little spacer. So I'll tighten that up, recheck it for alignment, and then tack the saw bracket to the bushing. Okay, that looks righteous. The next piece to get right is the bracket mount to the spine. So I'm going to do that. Before unclamping this, I'm going to drill a registry hole right about there so I know where to put it back to. Next, I'm going to weld up and gusset up and pretty up the bracket and the saw support member, just using little scraps and offcuts and little junk that I've got laying around. I'll show you some of it, but most of it I'm just going to do off camera. It's just me cutting, welding, and grinding. Here's the saw support member all grinded up and cleaned up. Now, just to make sure she's nice and stiff, I'm going to put a strong back down the middle of it, kind of like a spine. So I took another piece of the cereal box and just cut this pattern. I'm going to go find a scrap that I can cut that out of and weld that in place. That piece looks like it ought to do. It's the old vise jaw from the original chop saw. There it is. After some beating and twisting and banging, got that, and it clears my fingers. with the grip, so I'll sand that up and clean it up and then roll it on. There they are, all welded up and grinded up. Not finished sanded yet though. I'll do that when I finish sanding the rest of it. But look pretty good. Now it's time to work on the spine and the vise. For the mounting of the spine to the table, I found 2 of these brackets in my collection. I think they're from a bunch of junk office furniture that I scavenged out of the garbage. I'm going to weld one on each side, roughly here. But on this side, I think I'm going to put on a little weld nut and a bolt to use as a stop for the saw coming down. So I'll just tack that nut in there and then plug weld these brackets to the spine. But first I'm going to cut the spine to length. For the front of it, to cut it to length, I'm just going to go off the end of the pivot bracket plus a little bit, so I can weld a stop feature on here for when the saw tilts up. Got my brackets temporarily clamped on, and I got that actually super glued on at the moment, or hot glued on at the moment. Now I'm placing the vise so that the 4" by 4", which I'm simulating with a 4x4 and a piece of 1/2" plywood, clear the table and the front bearing. And right about there is where we want the vise. So now I'll mark the wing mounts. One other little mod that I did was drilled 1/2" holes in the bottom, front and back of the spine, so I can bolt it directly to a T-slot or a fixture table, in this case my weld table, without any clamps if I want to. Here's everything fully functional. So I ended up using just some scraps for the ears to mount the vise. The table mounts are tack welded in place. The stop you just saw me weld on is tacked in place. And there it is in the upstop position. There it is in the downstop position. I'm going to go ahead and disassemble this one more time, finish weld everything, grind everything, sand everything. I'll be back at you when that's done. There they are, all sanded up and grinded up and sanded down to 80 grit. Now I'm going to paint them this color, and the little pivot I'm going to make this color, which sort of match the powder coat that I used on the vise. Let's start the assembly by pressing in the bushings into the saw support member. For that, I'm just going to use a little block of wood and the number 4 garland. I'm going to put the base down in a T-slot using the handy dandy holes that I put in the spine. I'm going to mount the pivot to the spine. It's using 3/8 nuts and bolts and split washers, more for looks than anything. Then I'm going to mount the somewhat beat up shark fin vise. Again, just using split washers. They give it a little bit better look. Kind of like an AN washer, except I got them. And I don't have any AN washers. Next, I'm going to attach the saw support member. I'm going to install the handle screws so that when I torque this down, the saw support member stays in place and doesn't prevent me from putting the handle on later. And this is die cast aluminum, so snug is good enough. You don't have to reef down on it. And then the handle. And now I'm going to place the saw on the pivot. And everything's loose right now, so I can get it adjusted. First thing to snug down is the pivot, the right side wrench. Second thing to install is the stop. Third thing to snug up is the vise. Make sure it's parallel to the spine. Checking the blade one more time for parallel and being square to the table. And it looks righteous. So I'm going to snug these down. And there it is, all in one piece. There's the forward stop, hands free, so I can get in here easy and change the blade or set up my stock. I welded a washer onto the head of that bolt to make the target pad for the down stop a little bit bigger. Okay, let's cut something. Start with this junky piece of plywood. Just lop a chunk off it. Something a little more challenging, a piece of 1/4 inch scrap. I think it's about 1 inch wide. No problem, no effort either. It was just the weight of the saw doing that. Here's the piece. Well, I'm going to call this one a success. Very happy with the outcome. This baby's going into service, and it's on to the next project. I'll see you there and then.